Hello and welcome to the program. After Russia's annexation of Crimea and armed aggression in Donbas, Western countries, including EU and US, were unanimous in proclaiming the support of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, economic sanctions against the Kremlin were imposed. But on the fifth year of war, the unity of European countries regarding this issue begins to waver. To talk more about this topic, we welcome to the studio today Tetiana Levonuk. She's an analyst at the New Europe Center. Hello, and thank you for joining us. So, how do you explain this European attitude and the weakness of the EU now concerning the sanctions compared to the reaction 5 years ago?
Well, firstly, I would like to say that not all EU members proclaim about the losses from anti-Russian sanctions as well as Russian countermeasures. And there is a trend of European unity and integrity, and it will be the core issue during the discussion on the 13th of December about the prolongation, the possible prolongation of the anti-Russian sanctions for another 6 months. And I can say that the influence on the EU economies, on the economies of certain member states, is not so harmful as some European politicians are talking about, but the whole attitude of the European Union is just not to harm the whole situation and somehow stabilize Ukrainian situation, and it will be okay for this time.
So you would say that the sanctions are definitely more harmful for Russia than the EU as of right now?
Definitely.
Because you talked about these politicians. The example is interesting. Italy, for example, has his this speech about the fact and is aligned with the idea that about lifting sanctions. First, is it possible, and does it really harm economies Italy, these sanctions?
Well, I can say that Italy, according to our analysis of the New Europe Center, is the most active EU member whose politicians actively proclaim about big losses from the anti-Russian sanctions. But actually, according to the latest analysis, our latest analysis, and the data from Eurostat and national statistical agencies, I can say that their losses are not so big, and their proclamations is just a possibility to unite society in order regarding this sanctions policy, and just because of some good relations with Russia and actually the politicum of Italy. That's why I can say that the only harm is surely some damage to certain firms or business associations. But when we're talking about the sanctions policy, surely this harm is going to be.
No, Italy is not the only country asking and having that line, those lines towards the sanctions. I'm thinking about Austria, for example, since Sebastian Kurz went into power, it more opened the country to the idea of lifting the sanctions. How do you explain this attitude towards Russia from Austria?
Well, I can say that the Austrian government have a pro-European attitude towards this sanctions policy, anti-Russian sanctions, but the reasons are the presidency in the European Council, which must be a success for Sebastian Kurz and his government and his coalition overall. And actually, the losses from anti-Russian sanctions and Russian countermeasures for Austria is about 1.5% during this period of imposing sanctions. And that's why Austria will support a pro-European approach during the discussions on the 13th of December, because it's the end of its presidency. And actually, it's not ready to be an initiator of so-called sanctions killers club in the European Union now.
So does it try to act as a mediator between Europe and like the strong intermediate between Europe and Russia here?
Well, maybe because the relations between Russia and Austria are stable against the latest spy scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah, according to the latest just claims of Kneissel, the foreign minister of Austria, or for example Sebastian Kurz, the relations will stay at the same level. No Russian diplomats will be expelled regarding this spy scandal. And actually, the only harm is some firms that are lobbying their interests. And for example, such firms as OMV, which is the participant of the Nord Stream 2, or like Strabag, the biggest construction company in the European Union, they have partnership with Russia as previously, and everything is okay.
So it's business as usual.
Yeah, business as usual. This principle is very active in Austria, and actually this is a country whose politics is economy at the first place. And
there's another country where it's business as usual, which is a really peculiar case, which is Hungary, basically, where the Hungarian government signed a deal with Russia for a 10 million or billion nuclear plant, if I'm not wrong. But recently said it would impose new sanctions or prolong the sanctions against Russia towards Ukraine. How is it possible to reconcile those two things for Hungary?
Well, Hungary is an interesting country, and actually today during our roundtable we have a speech of Hungarian representative, and which said that some figures, according to the statistical agencies of Hungary, and the analysis of its economic centers or analytical centers, are true according to the calculations of all the firms which cooperate with Russia and which have some partnership. Actually, it's going to be about 6-7 millions of euros. But according to our analysis, the losses is just 78 million euros. And these figures are not so comparative from my part. And I can say that it's going to be, firstly, the political relations between Russia and Hungary. And secondly, it's about economics. And yet, this main scene or argument that some firms or business associations just have some harmful
influences,
harmful influences from these sanctions is the main and the only one.
No, and to
yes,
go, of course, go for it.
In conclusion, I would like to say that these countries like Hungary and Austria their politicians can proclaim about the influence of sanctions, but they will not be the initiators of this club against for lifting sanctions. Yeah, in the nearest future.
Who could be the initiator then?
Well, actually, I can see it like a symbiosis of certain countries, including this one, the aforementioned, but the question is who will be the first, and it's very controversial. And Italy, maybe, but the claims of Salvini
are a bit outrageous about it.
Yeah, is the only argument, and we have to take into account the problems of Hungary within the European Union, and the problems between the political party Fidesz with the European People's Party on the eve of the European elections in May 2019. It's very important for Hungary now. That's why it will stay with pro-European unity.
So now, and to conclude this interview, how can in this complicated, because it looks like a complicated geopolitical game between domestic policies, according or not towards international interest plus big businesses, how can potentially Ukraine weigh in into this process to have those sanctions extended and harder towards Russia?
Well, actually, during our roundtable, the representative of the President's administration said that we are preparing the so-called Azov sanctions, and we are preparing a document to just present for the European Union and the United States of America. And I can say that this sign is very good and it's the right decision. But we have to be more active in our propositions. I mean, when we are talking about the situation with the Kerch Bridge, the reaction of Ukraine, as well as the reaction of the European Union, was a bit late. Not a bit, was really late. And they're partly a mistake from our side, because we haven't proclaimed this danger. We haven't made great speeches. We haven't just take the attention of the European Union to this problem. And what we have, what are the results? Just sanctions against some companies, 6 or I guess 7. Which were constructing this bridge, but it's nothing like with the sanctions about the elections in the Donbas. So we have this late reaction, and that's why Ukraine have to be mostly proactive in this attitude, and we have to know what we want from the European Union. We have to take into account that unfortunately, excessive proclaims and
cannot work and
cannot work. And European politicians are talking about this now actively, and we have to be flexible, but our approach must be coordinated.
Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today. That was Tetiana Levonuk, an analyst at the European Center. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.